Welcome in, everybody, to Football Friday. Just 11 days out. 11 days out from the Philadelphia Eagles reporting training camp. Football Friday here on Birds 365. That's John McMullen, Eagles insider, Eagles beat reporter, NFL insider, Johnny Mack. I'm Xander Krauscher, host of Birds 365. Welcome, everybody, in on this Friday. Johnny Mack, how you doing on this Friday, brother?
Doing well. Only 2 more Football Fridays before training camp begins. So, yeah, we're really getting close to the countdown.
Only
and
one
that's
more,
good,
Johnny
man.
Mack. We only got next Friday.
Well, we got to get through this one, so I'm counting this one. So,
Okay, yeah, that's true. All right, so we got this one, and then we got next one. That's true. Just
yeah,
started here, so you're right. We
yeah,
got 2 more.
yeah. So we're getting closer, though. We're creeping up.
We certainly are creeping. For anybody that's been tuning in all week, we've been going through our training camp preview. Johnny Mack has been chronicling that over on si.com/NFL/Eagles. Great reporting. We did the quarterbacks, we did the running backs, we did the tight ends, obviously starting on the offensive side of the ball. Today, we're going to talk wide receivers. I got some good questions for Johnny Mack coming up later in hour number 2 of the show, so we will do them. And then in hour number 1, we will have guest Paul Domowich. Just 16 minutes away from Damo. So we will get to Paul Damo. We'll get to some cornerback questions later in the show, and then an overrated Eagles players segment. Yesterday we did overrated players. Johnny Mack says he's going to get himself in trouble.
It's gonna fire. They don't like when he criticizes people.
I might get myself in some trouble on that segment as well, but we'll do it. We'll have some fun. It's all in good fun as we prepare 11 days out, like I said, from training camp. Johnny Mack, let's dive into the receivers, man. You went through the preview. I know we've been talking about it a lot, but for the sake of the segment, for the sake of going through each position group as you are on si.com, how are you viewing the receiving group as a whole before we get into the nitty-gritty of it? The receiving group as a whole before training camp.
Well, it's hard to complain when you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. So that's where it starts. I mean, this is an organization that for years struggled to find meaningful wide receivers. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's a bad position.
Yeah.
It's arguably their best position as long as those guys stay healthy. I mean, Carson Wentz once set the franchise record for passing yards for this team and didn't have a receiver over 600 yards. Now you got a guy who threatens to crack 1,500, it seems, every year, and Devontae Smith, who's well over 1,000 himself. I mean, I said it before they ever played a game together with Jody, and he pushed back a little bit with me. I said, this is the most talented tandem the Eagles have ever had, ever, period. And people said, whoa, 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 whoa. And I said, I'm not talking best because that demands, a production and longevity and things like that. But I'm just talking from a talent standpoint. And I think people have seen it now. You got 2 full seasons with these 2 guys together. It's not even close. The Eagles have never had this before. People go back to Mike Quick, our buddy Mike Quick, and Hal Carmichael. They barely played together. So that doesn't count. Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin were very good, but they're not these 2 guys. I mean, it's just the best tandem the Eagles have ever had, and it's arguably the best tandem in the NFL. So that's the good stuff. And then the bad stuff, that's it. That's it. I said yesterday on the show, I think I got worse from Quez Watkins, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Julio Jones, the stew of that. If anything, they got worse than that. And it won't affect that much if those guys, AJ and DeMonte, stay healthy. But I mean, the depth has to be a concern because 2 day 3 picks, Anais Smith. I know our buddy James Carver's out there. We'll give him a shout out for the Anais Smith president of the fan club. Look, hopefully he becomes a big time player. But we're talking 2025, 2026. There's a developmental aspect to that. Same thing with Johnny Wilson. Hopefully the Eagles don't have a great history of development, bringing along developmental receivers. It's been Devontae Smith finished product, and that's basically it. So there's some concern there. And then Paris Campbell, John Ross, large sample size haven't produced. So, I mean, you can cross your fingers. There's a lot of crossing fingers with all over the place on this team with these veteran sort of lottery tickets, but you're more likely to get Greedy Williams and Justin Evans than you are to get Chris Long and Patrick Robinson, I would say.
Yeah, it's just the reality of it. Sometimes the cookie crumbles in your direction, and sometimes it doesn't, especially when you're playing in that game. John, before we get into more of the receivers, I want to ask you a question about Aaron Morehead. Um, he's the wide receivers coach in Philadelphia. For those who do not know, Aaron Morehead, Eagles wide receiver coach. What do you make of Aaron Morehead? I mean, you remember before we had Aaron Morehead, there was kind of a lot of talk
Oh, it's
about
ugly.
yeah, nobody liked the wide
Constant
receiver coach.
turnover. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of Aaron Morehead? How does he resonate with this team to you? How much of a role do you think he plays in getting these guys up to par? I mean, when you have guys like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, you're going to look like a good wide receivers coach. Those guys are finished products, highly skilled players. I more look at the back end. I more look at the next couple receivers. Like that's where Aaron's money is made. How do you view Aaron Morehead?
Yeah, it's kind of it's fun. First thing I say about Aaron is survivor, man. I mean, he came in at the end of the Doug Peterson era, which wasn't great, obviously. And you mentioned that turnover. It seemed you had the constant churn. Every year you had a different receiver coach, Greg Lewis, Gunnar Brewer, Aaron, and every year they turned it over. And I know when Nick got the job, Aaron was looking for other jobs. He thought he was out. New coaching staff, new head coach. He's going to want to bring in his own guys. They didn't have a relationship together. And for whatever reason, sometimes you can't line up with the people you want. And Aaron, Nick interviewed Aaron and said, "All right, let's give it another shot." And I remember the first training camp of Nick Sirianni. I mean, Nick played receiver in college, for those who don't know. He
You're right.
coached
He's got an
receiver.
extensive background at that
Yeah.
position.
And he paid a lot of attention to the wide receiver group in 2021, his first season in training camp. I mean, a lot, to the point I would joke about. I mean, is he the receivers coach or is he the head coach? And I think he wasn't comfortable with Aaron, didn't know him, as I said, and really sort of micromanaged it at first. And now here we are, and he's been here for 5 straight years. This will be his 5th year. But you're right. I mean, AJ and Devonta are going to be good no matter what. And it's about developmental. And I haven't seen a ton of developmental. That's all you can look at when you're talking about assistant coaches. He played the position himself. He's very big. It seems like, he speaks the same language as the big receivers, and the Eagles got a ton of big receivers, starting with AJ. And I think he has to work at sort of understanding what the smaller guys need to have to succeed, because he's 6'3". So but I think that's a battle with every position coach. When you talk about reputation and assistant coaches, I don't think it's off the charts like Jeff Stoutland, but few are. So I think he's done a good job. And the fact that he's been able to stay as long as he has in Philadelphia, of all places, which had constant churn at that coaching position, I think speaks to something as well. The fact that he's able to bridge and communicate and teach to where people think he's valuable.
Yeah, I mean, seems to be like he's a good coach. I mean, the interesting part of the dynamic you laid out to me is Nick's background in wide receiver play. Like you would think he would come in and that would maybe be the one position where he would be like, I got my guy at that spot. I know who I want to be the receivers coach. And Aaron was already here and he interviewed Aaron, as you mentioned, and the rest is history now. Going on 5 years for Aaron Morehead. So pretty good stuff from him, John. Now let's dive into the group. We already know that AJ Brown is your wide receiver one, and one of the best ones in the league at that, and you have Devontae Smith, probably one of the best wide receiver twos in the league at that. After that, it's as you've mentioned many times on the show, it's quite the cliff. Um, where are you on slot receiver? Not backup outside, but slot, where the majority of the reps in the slot position will come. Is it a guy on the roster? Is it Paris Campbell? Is it John Ross? Or is he somebody out there that we haven't picked up yet, or how he's still looking to acquire or make a trade for?
Well, right now, I think with what you have, Paris would be the heavy favorite going into training camp. Now, Howie's always looking to, he constantly tells you that talent acquisition season doesn't end with the draft or just after the draft or undrafted free agency. It goes all the way through the summer and really up to the trade deadline. So there's opportunities to make moves, and that's a position where he might go to camp and say, all right, let's see what we have. And if it doesn't impress him, very similar to linebacker last year when they came into camp, and then all of a sudden Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack showed up. Could be that type of situation. If he looks at it and says, how I think it's going to shake out is the fact that the rookies aren't ready. Probably wanted a little bit more than Paris Campbell and or John Ross. And he might look to add something at that point. So I think it's still an option that happens, but Paris Campbell will get every opportunity to prove that he can be a productive player, and who knows, playing with Devontae Smith and AJ Brown is certainly going to help him. He's never going to see a double team, I can tell you that. Nobody's going to be paying any attention to him, so there's going to be an opportunity, and maybe the big knock on Quez Watkins shouldn't have been the traffic or the number of receptions. The big knock on him should have been when the opportunity was there for him to make a play.
Right.
Too often he didn't make it. And that's what Paris Campbell has to do. Maybe he can do it.
Right. It's not about volume. It's about when the ball comes your way, when your number's called, you got to step up.
Exactly. And again, nobody's going to be paying attention to Paris Campbell when you have AJ and Devontae and Dallas Goedert and Saquon Barkley. So he's going to have an opportunity to be open and make something happen.
For those who don't know, Paris Campbell, a 2019 second-round draft pick to Indianapolis. He had one not very productive, but he had one pretty good season in 22 2 years ago where he played all 17 games. He had 63 receptions on 91 targets, 623 yards, an average of 9.9 yards per catch, and 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's not a bad season. If you're looking at anywhere close to those type of numbers, which I don't think he will because of our top two guys, maybe it's more with 400 to a 500-yard range. But if he can do that, I think that's a pretty good, slot receiver there. Now the concern is last year, as you've pointed out, John, 12 games played, only 20 receptions and 104 yards on the lowly New York Giants, who really don't have much of anything at the wide receiver position. So he got benched or didn't play much in New York, which I guess is somewhat concerning. But again, that 2022 year, somewhat promising. Let's hope we get that type of Paris Campbell in the offense. Johnny Mac, how about John Ross, the other guy who would he be if you just listed the wide receivers in the depth chart, not in any specific position, just 1 through 6. Is John Ross your 4?
Yeah, but I don't think it, because one of the things, when you talk about roster building, I think how he's kind of pigeonholed himself. I mentioned that yesterday, and the fact that he's not cutting an Smith, and he's not cutting Johnny Wilson unless they're just abject disasters over the summer.
Right.
And that's probably not going to happen either. So he's keeping those guys. So that's 4. You got the best punt returner in football, whose secondary job is receiver, and Britton Covey. That's 5. You're only going to keep 6. So even though, I would put Paris Campbell at 3 and John Ross at 4. In a true meritocracy standpoint, only one of them is going to make the team, the initial 53. Now, maybe that's fine because you can put veteran guys on the practice squad now. You don't even have to get them through waivers. They're both vested. I think John's vested. He played 4. So they don't even have to go through waivers. So you can do the wink wink thing and say, look, we need the roster spot. Just sit in the hotel for a day and we'll bring you back and put you on the practice squad. Then you can elevate them. So in other words, God forbid AJ or Devontae sprain an ankle against the Packers and you need a receiver. You're not going to throw Johnny Wilson out there in week 2. You're probably going to elevate somebody like Paris Campbell or John Ross from the practice squad. So I think that's the way Howie will handle it. But yeah, kind of pigeonholed himself from a roster building standpoint with those 2 day 3 receiver picks.
Yeah, you're right. He really did. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what he does. We got Paul Domowich in the green room, so we will get to our commercial break in just a second here. Jenny Mac, let's hit this super chat just real quick. Rashid Mixon, thanks for the 199, man. We appreciate you being here this morning. Appreciate everybody in the chat for being here this morning. What type of situation QBs did Jay Ross, John Ross, and PC Paris Campbell have? I mean, in Indianapolis, Paris Campbell, who was his quarterback? He was there since 2019, so he must have.
Well, he went through the churn of Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett,
Right.
Phillip Rivers, and that's when Nick was there. But I mean, Andrew Luck and Phillip were pretty good when it came to getting the football to receivers. So I'm not giving him a pass there. And he had the one good season in the walk year, maybe that. And I don't even want to put good on it. It was acceptable as a second round pick. The weird thing about Paris Campbell, he's a 4.3 something guy. He's a fast guy, and he averages 9 point. Even in his good season, he averages 9.9 yards per catch. That indicates a lot of quick throws. Dump offs. Maybe not.
That was Matt Ryan, his quarterback that year.
Yeah. So and Matt, by the way, is another quarterback. Say what you want at that stage of his career, but volume guy at the bare minimum. So Luck, Rivers, Brian, there's that constant churn, but you got high level volume quarterbacks with the exception of Jacoby Brissett. And last year with the Giants was an absolute disaster for everybody. And that's the excuse making machine of, the Giants don't have this, Giants don't have that, and that's the reason everybody stinks. Well, somebody's got to be good, and you're getting benched with a bunch of guys who stink. The Giants stuff just bothers the hell out of me. You can't make excuses for everybody and assume the minute they get out of the New York Giants, it's a bad organization. It has been. It continues to be. Ever since they moved on from Tom Coughlin and Mark Ross, but too much excuse making with those guys. And Eagles fans should know about the Giants more than they do because they see them twice a year.
Yeah. And then John Ross, I think he had like Andy Dalton when he had his best season.
Well, John was a top 10 pick. I mean, he just had a lot of injuries. He himself admitted that put him in a dark place. He was having a lot of personal issues. He's got talent, but he hasn't played since 2021. He's still young, but that's when you talk about lottery ticket, that's you can't build your foundation on John Ross. Hopefully he figures it out. He seems to have matured. And he certainly has, as I say, the descriptor he always used. He's got traits in his body. You can see that. You can see he's a high level athlete, but it's tough to count on him.
Tough to count. We'll get to our commercial break. After Damo, we will finish up on the wide receiver talk. I just want to get into the rookies, Anais Smith and Johnny Wilson. We'll talk a little bit about them. Pajama Johnny. who we dubbed him yesterday. So we'll talk about a little bit about him in hour number 2. Coming up next is Paul Domwich. Thank you all for being in the chat this morning. Appreciate all of you guys. Make sure you drop a like on the show. Stay tuned. Paul Domwich next on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.